It was an ordinary morning in a bustling town, but for 18-year-old Emma, nothing about her life had been ordinary for the past few months. As she sat outside the small cafe, clutching her sketchbook with trembling hands, a heavy weight hung over her. The sound of passing cars and murmurs of strangers didn't help drown out the loud, constant ticking in her head, the ticking of the clock. She had very little time. Time that she could never get back. And the treatment she needed. It was far beyond what her family could afford. Emma had been battling cancer for over a year now, enduring the pain, the hospital visits, and the endless rounds of chemotherapy that seemed to drain not just her strength but her spirit. Yet, in the midst of all this darkness, there was one thing that kept her going: her art. Painting had always been her escape, her way of expressing the world when words failed her. But now, her artwork wasn't just a passion, it was her lifeline. Every brushstroke on the canvas, every piece she sold, brought her one step closer to the money she needed for her treatments. But the goal seemed so far out of reach. Every sale felt like a victory, but each victory only led to the realization that she wasn't even close to where she needed to be. That morning, Emma had set up a little stand by the sidewalk, displaying her art for anyone willing to buy. It wasn't much, just a few pieces of her best work: watercolors of sunrises, portraits of people, and abstract pieces that felt like fragments of her soul. She knew the chances were slim, but it was the only thing she could do. The only way she could raise the money she so desperately needed. She wasn't asking for sympathy, not even for charity. She was simply trying to survive, to keep fighting. As she sat there, a cold breeze brushed past her, causing her to pull her coat tighter around her. People walked by, their eyes briefly flicking to her artwork, but none of them stopped. Some glanced with curiosity, others with indifference, but no one reached for their wallet. Emma's heart sank a little more with each passing second. It was getting harder to stay hopeful. She had to keep going though, for herself, for her family, for the future that seemed so uncertain. She thought of her mother's tired face, the way her father had been working overtime, sacrificing everything to help her get better. And then, just as she was about to pack up and go home, something unusual happened. A figure appeared in the distance, strolling casually down the street. He was tall, with silver hair and a confident stride. His presence almost magnetic. Emma couldn't help but notice him. There was something about him that felt different. Something familiar, but she couldn't place it. As he drew closer, her heart skipped a beat. Clint Eastwood. She blinked, sure she was imagining things. But no, it was him. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor, the man who had graced the silver screen for decades. The man whose films had shaped Hollywood. What on earth was he doing in her little town? She had no idea, but there he was, walking right past her stand as if he were just another person in the crowd. For a brief moment, Emma felt like she had been frozen in time. She watched him approach, almost too stunned to speak. Then, to her utter disbelief, Clint slowed his pace and turned toward her artwork. The soft murmur of the crowd faded as her pulse quickened. Was this a dream? Was this really happening? She had seen him in countless movies, but she never imagined this encounter would take place in such a small, quiet town. Clint Eastwood, the man who had faced down enemies on screen, was now standing in front of her, looking intently at her artwork. She tried to gather her thoughts, but they scattered like leaves in the wind. Was he interested? Was he just being polite? The uncertainty gnawed at her. But then, without saying a word, he pointed to one of her pieces, the abstract painting with streaks of red and blue, a piece that had been particularly difficult for her to finish. "How much for this one?" he asked. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just any buyer, it was Clint Eastwood. She tried to compose herself, forcing her voice to stay steady. $50, she said, barely able to believe her own words. $50. It seemed like such a small amount for something so important, but it was all she could ask for. She needed that money, and yet the thought of selling a piece of her heart to someone so famous, so out of her world, made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a dream. Clint nodded, and to her shock, he handed her $100 bill. Keep the change, he said simply. His deep voice smooth and unhurried. Emma's hands shook as she took the bill from him. She wanted to thank him, to say something, but the words caught in her throat. What could she possibly say to Clint Eastwood? Before she could gather her thoughts, he was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd. The world seemed to spin in slow motion as she stood there, holding the money in her hand, unsure of what had just happened. Had he really just bought her painting? Was this some kind of sign? Or was it just an unbelievable coincidence? But there was no time to dwell on it. In the moment of disbelief, something even stranger happened. A man in a suit, who had been watching from a distance, stepped forward with a quick smile. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said. "You're looking for funds for your treatment, right?" Emma nodded, still processing the surreal moment. "Yes, I am. But I can't believe he just bought my painting. I mean, Clint Eastwood. That's crazy." The man's eyes glinted with interest. "Funny you should mention that. I work with a foundation that helps people in situations like yours. Maybe we can help." Her heart raced. Was this another twist in the story, or was it all too good to be true? Stay tuned. Emma stood there for a moment, her fingers still clutching the $100 bill as the man in the suit continued to watch her with an expression that was almost too calm for the situation. He didn't seem to be in any rush, which made Emma uneasy. Everything about this felt too strange, too surreal. She had just sold a painting to Clint Eastwood, and now this mysterious man appeared out of nowhere, mentioning a foundation that could help her with her treatment. It was as though the universe was handing her a lifeline, but something inside her couldn't shake the feeling that it was too good to be true. The man smiled again, though this time it felt a little more practiced. "I can help you get in touch with the right people," he said, his voice low and smooth. "We work with a lot of individuals facing tough situations just like you. We specialize in assisting with medical expenses, providing support where it's needed most." Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that everything was finally turning in her favor, that she might not have to worry about the next round of chemotherapy or how she would pay for it. But something about the whole encounter made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and all it would take was one wrong move for everything to come crashing down. I don't know," Emma said, her voice faltering. She glanced back at the $100 bill in her hand. "I don't want to get my hopes up. I've been down this road before and I don't know if I can trust someone else telling me that they can help." The man seemed unfazed by her hesitation. He looked around, his eyes scanning the street, before finally locking back onto hers. "I understand your skepticism. Believe me, I get it. But think of this as an opportunity. You don't have to do this alone. There's no harm in talking to the right people, seeing what options are available." He paused, his gaze softening. "Look, I've seen what you're going through. Your art, it's clear you've put your heart into it. And I think that counts for something." Emma wanted to believe him. It wasn't like she had much else to turn to. Her family had been doing everything they could to scrape together enough money for her treatment, but it was barely enough to cover the medical bills, let alone the cost of the chemo sessions she still needed. They had even considered taking out a loan, but the interest rates were insane, and they didn't want to end up in debt for the rest of their lives. But trusting this man, was she ready to take that leap? "I appreciate the offer," she said slowly, "but I need time to think about it. I don't want to make any decisions in a rush." The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course, take all the time you need. But don't wait too long," he said with a slight tilt of his head. "When people like you have the chance to get real help, they need to act quickly. Otherwise, the window can close, and you might miss your shot." With that, he turned and walked away, blending into the crowd as if he had never been there. Emma watched him go, her mind racing. What had just happened? Was it all some elaborate trick, or was he genuinely offering her something real? She glanced down at the bill in her hand again, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier than before. The painting had been a small victory, but was this foundation going to be the turning point she'd been hoping for? She wanted to feel hopeful, to believe in the kindness of strangers. But in her experience, hope didn't always lead to good things. More often than not, it felt like hope was just a precursor to more disappointment. As the day wore on, Emma couldn't shake the thought of Clint Eastwood's brief appearance. What had brought him to her corner of the world? She knew he had a reputation for being a man of few words, but what had he seen in her art that made him stop, let alone buy a painting without so much as a second thought? She wondered if he'd recognized something in her, the same strength that had kept her going through the darkest days of her illness. Or had he simply been moved by the art itself, the colors, the strokes, the raw emotion that she poured into every piece? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a message from her mother, but it was an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered the call. "Hello," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity and apprehension. "Emma." A familiar voice spoke on the other end. It was her father. "I just got off the phone with the hospital. They said they've got an opening for your next round of treatment next week. But, Emma, I need to talk to you about something." Her stomach twisted. "What is it, Dad?" "Your mother and I were looking over the bills again, and we're getting close to the point where we're going to have to make some hard choices. The treatments are getting more expensive, and we've exhausted every option we have for assistance. I don't want to scare you, but..." His voice trailed off. "We might need to consider cutting back on some of the things we've been doing to save up for your treatments. I'm just being honest with you." Emma's heart sank. The reality of her situation hit her all over again. No matter how much she tried to push it away, the truth was undeniable. They didn't have enough money to keep going. She had already been pushing herself too hard, fighting with everything she had, but now it seemed like the odds were stacked against her. "Dad, please don't," Emma whispered, fighting back tears. "We can't give up now. I'm not ready to stop. We just have to figure something out." "I know, sweetheart," her dad replied, his voice cracking. "I know. But we're running out of time. You need this treatment, and we're not sure how much longer we can stretch the budget. I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing." Emma hung up the phone, her thoughts spinning. The reality of the situation was sinking in deeper with every passing minute. The pressure, the stress, it was all building up around her like a storm she couldn't escape. She needed help. Real help. But was she willing to trust the mysterious man from earlier, or was she walking into something that could make everything worse? As she packed up her stand, the weight of the $100 bill pressed heavily in her pocket, a bittersweet reminder that it wasn't nearly enough. Emma walked home in a daze, the weight of the $100 bill in her pocket seeming to grow heavier with each step. The world around her continued to bustle, people moving in their everyday rhythms, but she felt as if she were standing outside of it all, trapped in a fog of confusion. Her mind was tangled with questions, each one more urgent than the last. Who was the man in the suit? Could he really help her? Was Clint Eastwood's gesture a sign, or was it all just a random coincidence? As she neared her apartment building, she caught sight of her mother sitting on the porch, her face drawn and tired. The woman who had always been her pillar of strength, the one who had never once shown fear, was now fighting her own battles. Emma's heart tightened as she approached. She didn't want to burden her mother with her worries, not when she was already carrying so much herself, but the truth was Emma was running out of options. "Mom, how are you?" Emma asked, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. Her mother looked up, offering a faint smile. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just tired." She patted the seat next to her. "Come sit down. We need to talk." Emma hesitated, her chest tightening at the word talk. It had become the unspoken signal that something serious was on the horizon. She sat down beside her mother, the cool air of the evening brushing against her skin, and waited for her to speak. "I called the hospital today," her mother began, her voice heavier than usual. "They've got you scheduled for your next round of chemo. But..." She paused, searching for the right words. "Emma, I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. The bills keep piling up, and I don't want you to feel like we're giving up, but I can't keep going like this." Emma's stomach dropped. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud was different. It was real and it was happening now. She had been hoping for a miracle, something that would ease the strain, but reality had a way of crushing dreams, and hers was no exception. "I know, Mom," Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to figure something out too. I sold one of my paintings today." She pulled out the bill, holding it up. Clint Eastwood bought it. Her mother's eyes widened in disbelief, then softened. "Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood." Emma nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but he actually stopped and looked at my art. He bought a painting. He even gave me extra money." She let out a breath, feeling the weight of the strange encounter all over again. "It's not enough, though. It's not nearly enough." Her mother was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowing as she processed the information. "Well, maybe it's a sign," she said slowly. "Maybe there's something in this. Maybe this is the start of something. Something that could really help us." Emma shook her head. "It's not enough, Mom. Just one painting. What happens next? I can't keep relying on luck." Her mother reached over, placing a gentle hand on Emma's. "You're not relying on luck. You're relying on your strength. You've always been strong, Emma. Don't lose that now." Emma tried to smile, but it felt forced. Her mother was always the one telling her to stay strong, to keep fighting, but Emma was tired. So tired. The constant battle, the endless hospital visits, the uncertainty of whether there would even be a future. It was wearing her down in ways she couldn't explain. That night, as Emma lay in bed, her mind wouldn't stop racing. What if the man in the suit was right? What if this foundation he mentioned could help her? She had heard of organizations that supported cancer patients, but they were often so overwhelmed with requests that it was almost impossible to get help. She had heard horror stories of people who had been promised assistance only to find out later that it was a scam, a false hope. But the man had seemed genuine. There was something about the way he spoke, the calm confidence in his voice that made her wonder. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it than what he was letting on. Something hidden beneath the surface. The next morning, after an agonizing night of no sleep, Emma found herself standing in front of the same cafe, where she had sold her painting. It was early, and the world was just beginning to wake up, the streets quiet except for the occasional passerby. She stood there, watching the people around her, her thoughts weighed down by everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The encounter with Clint Eastwood still felt surreal, as if it were part of a dream. She had expected him to walk right past her, but instead he had stopped, had actually paid for her art without hesitation. The memory of his presence was so vivid in her mind that it almost felt like he was still standing there, looking at her, watching her every move. What had made him stop? What had he seen in her work that had made him want to buy it? But the bigger question loomed over her. Why had he been there? Emma had heard whispers of Clint Eastwood coming to town, rumors of him visiting a nearby film studio, but she had never expected to encounter him, let alone in such an intimate, personal way. There had to be a reason he had come into her life at that exact moment. But what was it? She pulled out her phone, staring at the number the man in the suit had left her. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. What if this was all a mistake? What if she was walking into something she couldn't handle? But then again, what other choice did she have? She couldn't let this opportunity slip by, not when everything was on the line. With a deep breath, Emma pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice before a voice answered. "Hello, Emma," the man said, his tone smooth and expectant. "I was wondering when you'd call." Her heart raced as she took a step forward, her mind conflicted. "What now?" I don't know if I should trust you," Emma said, her voice shaky. "This all seems too good to be true." The man's voice softened. "I understand your hesitation, but sometimes the right things come into your life at the most unexpected times. Let me help you. You've already taken the first step." Emma's mind swirled with uncertainty, but she couldn't turn back now. Not when everything seemed to hinge on this one moment. "I'm listening," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's voice on the other end of the phone was calm, almost too calm, like he had been waiting for this moment. "You've made the right choice, Emma. I knew you would come around. Trust me, this foundation I mentioned. It's real, it's powerful, and it's exactly what you need right now. We can get you the help you're looking for." His words were smooth, reassuring, but something in the back of Emma's mind kept warning her to be careful. She had no idea how the man knew her name, how he even knew about her situation, but the feeling of being pulled into something she didn't fully understand was overwhelming. She had no answers, just the thin hope that this could be her way out, her chance at survival. "I don't know," she said softly, her throat tightening. "It just feels like too much. What do you want from me in return?" The silence on the other end of the line was almost too long, as if he was weighing her words, deciding how much to say. "There's no catch, Emma," he finally replied. "But sometimes when you're offered help, you have to let go of some things in return. It's the way these things work." His voice took on a more serious tone. "You'll see. You just have to trust the process." Emma felt a chill crawl down her spine. His words seemed innocuous enough, but there was a weight behind them, an unspoken warning she couldn't quite place. She had been clinging to hope for so long that she was willing to grab at anything that might keep her afloat. But at what cost? What would she have to give up to get the help she so desperately needed? She tried to push the doubt away, telling herself that she was only thinking too much. It was too easy to let fear take hold, too easy to question everything when the stakes were so high. "I need to think about this," she said, her voice strained. "I don't know if I'm ready." The man was silent for a moment before responding, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't have much time, Emma. These opportunities don't last forever." The words hung in the air, an urgent reminder of everything she stood to lose. "The sooner you act, the sooner we can get you the help you need." Before she could respond, the call ended abruptly, leaving her holding the phone to her ear, her mind spinning. What was that supposed to mean? Why did everything feel like a race against time? She looked down at the phone screen, the sudden silence almost deafening, and knew she couldn't ignore this any longer. But how could she trust someone she barely knew, someone who spoke in riddles, who made promises that sounded too good to be true? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on her apartment door. It was quick, sharp, and unexpected. Emma froze, her heart racing as she glanced toward the door, unsure whether she should open it. The last few days had been a blur of confusion, and now, with the phone call still fresh in her mind, she wasn't sure what was real anymore. Another knock, louder this time, followed by a voice she recognized. "Emma, it's me. Open up." It was her best friend, Sarah. Emma rushed to the door, relief washing over her at the familiar sound of Sarah's voice. She hadn't seen her friend in days, consumed by the endless cycles of hospital visits and the weight of her illness. Sarah had been one of the few people who understood, who never treated her like she was fragile, and for that Emma was grateful. She opened the door and Sarah stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room, immediately noticing the tension in Emma's face. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma didn't answer at first. Instead, she walked over to the couch and sat down, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone tightly. "It's all too much, Sarah. Everything's moving too fast, and I don't know who to trust anymore." She looked up at her friend, eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and uncertainty. "This man, he wants to help, but he said there's something I'd have to give up in return. I don't understand what that means. It doesn't feel right." Sarah frowned, sitting down beside her. "Emma, I get it. You're desperate. You want to find a way out of this, but you can't just trust anyone who promises you something. You've got to be careful." She paused, her voice growing softer. "What exactly did he say to you?" Emma recounted the conversation, every word echoing in her mind, and when she finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "This feels wrong, Em. Doesn't sit right with me. Why can't he just tell you everything up front? Why all the mystery? People who are truly trying to help don't hide things." The tension between them thickened, But Emma couldn't bring herself to let go of the hope that the man might be telling the truth. She had been fighting for so long. Her body was worn down, and the idea of finally finding something that could help, something that could give her back even a sliver of the future she had been dreaming of, was too tempting to ignore. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," Emma whispered. "I don't know if I can just walk away from this. What if this is the only chance I'll ever get?" Sarah placed a hand on Emma's shoulder, her expression softening. "But what if it's not? What if you're trading one problem for another? We don't know who this guy is, what he's really offering you. You can't just dive into this without understanding the consequences. You're not alone in this, okay? You have people who care about you." Before Emma could respond, there was a sudden loud crash from the other side of the apartment. The sound was so jarring that both women jumped to their feet, the tension in the room rising to an unbearable level. Emma's heart raced as she instinctively looked toward the window, half expecting to see something, or someone, standing outside. The crash was followed by hurried footsteps, and then, without warning, the door to the apartment burst open, sending Emma's pulse into overdrive. Standing in the doorway, framed by the dim light of the hallway, was the man in the suit. His face was hard, his eyes cold. "You've made your decision," he said, his voice sharp and low. "I'm afraid it's too late to back out now." The man in the suit stood in the doorway, his cold eyes scanning the room with a predatory focus. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. How had he gotten in? She hadn't given him her address, hadn't even told him where she lived. Yet, here he was, standing right in front of her, as if he'd been expecting this moment all along. Sarah stepped in front of Emma instinctively, a protective move that Emma hadn't expected but was grateful for. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, her voice sharp and filled with authority. "What do you want with my friend?" The man didn't flinch at Sarah's boldness. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his gaze shifting between the two women before landing back on Emma. "You've made your choice, Emma. We don't have time for hesitation anymore." His words were deliberate, almost rehearsed. The tone wasn't threatening, but there was something chilling in the certainty of his delivery, as if everything he said was already set in stone. Emma's heart pounded. "What do you mean, my choice?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I never agreed to anything." The man smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, you already have. It's not about agreeing anymore, Emma. You've been given an opportunity, and you're at the crossroads. The foundation I work for, it's not some random charity. We've been keeping an eye on you. You've been chosen, and it's not a decision you can simply walk away from." Emma's mind reeled. They've been watching me. How long had they been tracking her? Why? She felt like the walls were closing in, her entire world spinning faster than she could grasp it. "Chosen." Sarah's voice was louder now, the edge in it growing. "What kind of game are you playing here? You don't just show up and—" But the man cut her off with a single raised hand. "I'm not here to explain myself to you," he said, his eyes never leaving Emma. "This is about her now, not you. And I'm afraid you've already been involved more than you realize." The words landed like a blow. Sarah's face went pale, her expression shifting from concern to something far more intense, a flash of suspicion, a growing realization that they were in way over their heads. Emma, too, felt the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. Suddenly, the room seemed smaller, as if it were closing in on them. Emma's thoughts spun. What had he meant by involved? Had they been watching her all along? Had the man known about her paintings, about her struggle with chemo, before she ever met him? And what was this foundation he was talking about? If it was as legitimate as he claimed, why did everything feel so off? Then, without warning, a sound, sharp, metallic, cut through the tension. Emma's eyes flicked to the side, her pulse quickening as she saw a figure in the doorway behind the man in the suit. A second person had entered, his silhouette dark against the light from the hallway. The figure stepped into the room, and Emma felt her stomach drop as the face of the newcomer became clearer. It was Clint Eastwood. Her heart skipped a beat, the world around her falling into an eerie silence. The legendary actor, the one who had bought her painting just a day before, was standing in her apartment, looking every bit as serious and composed as the man who had just walked in. "Clint," Emma whispered, hardly able to believe what she was seeing. This was too much. Too much to process. What was going on? Why was Clint Eastwood here, standing beside a man she didn't trust? Clint's eyes met hers, but his expression didn't hold the warmth or the kindness she had seen before. There was no recognition, no hint of the empathy he had shown when buying her painting. Instead, his gaze was cold, detached, almost like he was a stranger. "I'm afraid things aren't what they seem, Emma," Clint said, his voice low, but with an undeniable edge to it. "You're being offered something far bigger than you realize. Something that's not just about you anymore." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. "You've been chosen." Just like the man said. The shock of hearing him speak like this left Emma momentarily speechless. She looked from Clint to the man in the suit and back again, her mind struggling to connect the dots. Was this all some sort of setup? Was it possible that Clint Eastwood, of all people, was involved in whatever this was? The man in the suit stepped forward again, his gaze never leaving Emma. "You've heard it from him now. The foundation isn't just a charity, and this isn't just a gift. It's a calling. You've been chosen because of your potential, because your artwork, your story has power. And we believe you have the strength to be a part of something much bigger than yourself." Emma felt the floor shift beneath her, like the ground she had been standing on was suddenly giving way. What were they talking about? Chosen for what? She had been desperate for a way out, but now she was faced with more questions than answers. Was this all real, or was she being manipulated into something she couldn't escape from? Clint took a slow step forward, his presence imposing as he loomed just a few feet away from Emma. "You don't have to understand everything right now. All you need to know is that you've reached a point of no return. The question is, are you ready to make the choice?" The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. There it was. The ultimatum. There was no more pretending that this was just about getting help with her treatment. No, this was something far darker, something that involved far more than she had ever anticipated. Her pulse quickened, the weight of their words pressing in on her chest. What choice? What had they planned for her? She opened her mouth to speak, to ask questions that were burning inside her. But before she could say anything, the man in the suit raised a finger to his lips. "Time's up, Emma. You don't have the luxury of asking questions anymore. Make your decision." The room seemed to close in even more, the air thick with tension. Emma felt trapped, caught between fear and desperation, between trusting her gut and the promise of something bigger. The clock was ticking and she knew, deep down, that whatever she decided now would change everything. But how could she make a choice when she didn't even know what she was choosing? As the man in the suit turned and stepped back into the hallway, Clint Eastwood's piercing gaze followed Emma, his silence speaking volumes. And just like that, the door clicked shut behind them. Emma stood there, staring at the empty space where they had just been. Her body trembled, her heart racing as she tried to process what had just happened. This was far from over. It had just begun. Emma stood motionless in the empty room, the silence surrounding her now unbearable. Her heart pounded, and every inch of her body screamed for answers. What was she supposed to do now? The door had closed behind Clint and the man in the suit, leaving her with nothing but confusion and dread. But the words they had left her with hung in the air like a fog she couldn't escape. "You've made your choice." Her breath was shallow, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. How could she be chosen when she hadn't even known this world existed? How could something this terrifying feel like the only way forward? The promise of help was now a looming shadow over her, and she had no idea if she was stepping into salvation or doom. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text message from Sarah, her best friend. "Are you okay?" The question seemed so simple, but Emma couldn't even begin to explain what had happened in the last few minutes, let alone the entire sequence of strange events. Her fingers hovered over the screen, But before she could type a response, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Her heart skipped again. The timing was too eerie. With a shaky hand, she answered the call. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Emma," came the familiar voice of the man in the suit. "We didn't expect you to be so resistant. But that's all right. Time is running out. You've made your choice, but there's still one final step." Emma's pulse quickened. "What final step? What are you talking about?" She felt desperate now, her anxiety mixing with anger. She didn't understand any of this. How could she be expected to make a choice when she was in the dark? "Just listen closely," he continued, his tone even calculated. "Clint Eastwood is more than just a celebrity. He's the face of this initiative, a key figure in what we're building. But what you don't know, Emma, is that you are just as integral to this as he is. Your artwork. It's not just about selling paintings. It's about the impact your story could have." "What story?" Emma's mind was spinning. "I don't even know who you are or what you're really asking me to do." The man chuckled softly, as though he were amused by her confusion. "You don't need to know everything just yet. But think about it. You've been fighting for your life, using your art as a way to cope with the pain. Your story resonates with people. It's already happening. The support you've received, the way your work has touched others, it's exactly what we need. You've been chosen because your voice can change the world." Emma's stomach churned. The weight of his words settled on her like a heavy stone, pressing down on her chest. This didn't feel right. Change the world. How could she possibly change the world with a painting? With her struggle to stay alive? "Tell me what you really want from me," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "What's the catch?" Another long pause on the line. Then his voice returned, now darker. "It's simple, Emma. You have the power to influence, to inspire, to bring awareness to a cause greater than your own. But we need to take your story public. We need you to be a face, a figurehead. You'll share your journey, everything, the chemo, the art, the fight for survival. We'll help fund your treatment, but in return, you'll become part of the campaign we're building." Emma's mind raced. Campaign. She had never wanted to be anyone's spokesperson. She had only wanted to paint, to find some meaning in the mess of her illness, to find an escape. Now, she was being told that her suffering had been noticed, but not for the reasons she had hoped. "And Clint?" Emma asked, almost afraid of the answer. "What's his role in all of this?" "Clint is here to show you the path. He's been through battles of his own, in different ways. He's seen what it takes to rise above adversity. He's not just a symbol. He's the one who believes you have what it takes to make it. We've all agreed on this. He'll mentor you, guide you." Emma's mind reeled. The man in the suit's words had a strangely hypnotic quality. Every sentence seemed to pull her deeper into something she didn't understand, something far beyond her control. But then something shifted. A sudden, sharp crack of realization jolted her out of her trance. She looked at the phone screen again, scanning the number, trying to recall any details about the call. It was an unknown number, but there was something familiar about it, something she couldn't place. "Wait," Emma said, her voice rising with a new urgency. "How do I know this is real? How do I know you're not just—" She froze mid-sentence, her blood running cold. "Number. Voice." The way everything felt too orchestrated. Before she could finish, the man cut in again, his tone suddenly more sinister. "Because, Emma, you've already been a part of this longer than you think. Everything you've done, every step you've taken, has been leading to this moment." Emma's eyes widened as a memory flashed in her mind, a brief, almost forgotten detail. The business card she had seen on the cafe table the day Clint bought her painting. She had thought it was just a small, insignificant gesture. But now, as her mind raced through the details, she realized something horrifying. The man on the other end of the line wasn't a stranger. He was someone who had been involved from the very beginning. The painting. Clint's mysterious involvement. The whole thing was connected. Her breath caught as she remembered the logo on the business card, the foundation for art and awareness. It was the same logo on the briefcase the man had been carrying. But the foundation wasn't about charity at all. It was about exploitation. "You've been using me," Emma whispered, the truth crashing down on her. "This whole time I've been part of your campaign." The man's laugh echoed in her ear, cold and detached. "I wouldn't say using, Emma. Guiding. You were chosen because your story is powerful. And now, you're part of something that will make you bigger than you ever imagined." Her stomach lurched. Everything had been a setup. Clint's involvement, the man's promises, all of it. She had been a pawn in their game. Her struggle turned into a commodity, a product to sell. She had been chosen, yes, but not for the reasons she had hoped. "Goodbye, Emma," the man said, his voice final. "It's time for you to step into the spotlight." The call ended with a sharp click. Emma stood there, the weight of it all settling in. She had been played, manipulated by a system that had used her at her most vulnerable. But something inside her sparked, a flicker of defiance. She wasn't going to let them control her anymore. She wasn't going to be anyone's puppet. And just as she turned to grab her jacket, there was a knock at the door. A loud, insistent knock. She opened it, unsure of what she would face next, but bracing herself for whatever came. The person standing there was familiar. Too familiar. It was Clint Eastwood, but this time his expression was different. He wasn't the mentor anymore. He wasn't the symbol of hope. His face was grave, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry, Emma," Clint said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted this for you. But now we've both got to deal with the consequences." And just like that, Emma knew, the real game was only beginning. Emma stared at Clint, her mind a blur of conflicting emotions. He looked older up close, more tired than the public persona she had seen on screen. But it wasn't his age that grabbed her attention. It was the sorrow in his eyes, the way he stood there, almost as if he were bracing himself for something he couldn't escape. The realization hit her harder than anything else had. Clint Eastwood, the man who had seemed like a beacon of hope just days ago, was part of a much darker web than she had ever imagined. "What do you mean? We've both got to deal with the consequences." Emma's voice was steady, though her insides were a storm of uncertainty. She needed answers, she needed to know the truth. Clint took a deep breath before stepping into the room, his expression full of regret. "I didn't want this, Emma. I thought I was doing the right thing. The foundation, they offered me a chance to help people. They said they wanted to fund young artists, to give them a platform, a way to get their work out there. But somewhere along the way, it became more about control than anything else." He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "I thought I could make a difference, be a mentor. But when they contacted me about you, I had no idea the extent of what they were really planning. I thought they were going to help you with your chemo, make sure your treatment was covered. But it went deeper than that. It was all about using you as part of a campaign to sell an image, to manipulate people's emotions, to make them invest in your story, in your struggle." Emma's stomach turned. This was worse than she had ever imagined. Clint Eastwood, the man she had once admired, wasn't the hero in this story. He was just as much a victim as she had been. He had been sucked into the same system, using his fame to push an agenda that wasn't about helping people. It was about selling a narrative. "So why did you come here?" Emma asked, her voice softer now, the anger starting to fade. "Why did you come to me now?" Clint looked at her, his eyes filled with guilt. "I couldn't live with myself anymore, Emma. I didn't know how far this was going to go. When they said you were going to be their next face, I thought maybe you could handle it. But when I saw what was happening, the way they were pushing you, manipulating your story, I realized how wrong everything had become. I needed to warn you. I needed to tell you the truth." Emma's mind swirled with the weight of everything she had learned. She had been just another pawn in a game she never asked to play. Her life turned into content to sell to an audience. Her illness, her fight for survival, her art, they had all been co-opted into something far bigger than she ever imagined. And Clint, despite all his wisdom, had been part of it too. He had tried to help, but in doing so, he had only reinforced the system that was exploiting her. "But what now?" Emma whispered, her voice filled with a mix of fear and uncertainty. "What do I do now? Can't go back to that. I can't be a part of it anymore." Clint took a step closer, his gaze softening. "You don't have to be. That's why I came here. I'm going to help you, Emma. I'll make sure you get the treatment you need without all of this." "Without them?" Emma shook her head slowly, still trying to process the magnitude of everything. "But they're not just going to let me walk away, are they?" Clint's face hardened for a moment, a flicker of anger flashing in his eyes. "No, they won't. But we have a choice, Emma. You don't have to be their puppet. You don't have to play by their rules. I've got resources. I've got connections. And more importantly, I know people who can get you the treatment you need. On your terms, not theirs." The words hit Emma like a wave of relief. She had been so consumed by the pressure, the choices, the manipulation, that she hadn't realized how much power she still had. She didn't need to let them control her anymore. She had the chance to take back her life, to fight for herself. Not for the campaign, not for the image they were trying to sell, but for her own survival. Clint continued, his voice filled with conviction. "You don't owe them anything. You've already done enough by sharing your art, by giving people hope. But it's about you now. Your health. Your future. You don't need them to be the hero of your story, Emma. You're the hero." For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma let herself breathe. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. She had the support she needed. She could finally make her own decisions. "I don't know what to say," Emma whispered, tears threatening to spill. "I feel so lost. But I think I'm ready to fight back." Clint smiled at her, a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "That's all I wanted to hear." Over the next few weeks, things started to change. With Clint's help, Emma disconnected from the Foundation's campaign. She cut ties with the people who had promised her the world but only wanted to exploit her. It wasn't easy. There were phone calls, emails, pressure from all sides, but Emma held firm. She didn't need them to validate her worth. She didn't need anyone to tell her what her art meant. It was hers and hers alone. The hardest part, though, was facing her health. The chemo was still a struggle, but with Clint's resources, she was able to get the treatment she needed without being part of someone else's agenda. She no longer felt like her story was a tool for profit. She was just a woman fighting for her life, using her art to express the emotions that had been suffocating her for so long. Months passed, and Emma's art began to shift. She painted with more clarity now, no longer bogged down by the weight of expectation. Her work spoke of resilience, of strength, of hope, but it was her own hope, her own strength that she was expressing, not the story someone else had crafted for her. One day, while sitting in her studio, Emma received a letter. It was from the Foundation. At first, she felt a surge of panic, unsure of what it contained. But when she opened it, she found a simple message. "We regret to inform you that your association with the campaign is no longer required. However, we believe your story still has potential. We'll be watching." It was clear to Emma now. They didn't need her anymore. She had been too much of a risk, someone who refused to be controlled. But she wasn't angry. She was free. She had taken back her narrative, her life, her art. Clint had been right. She was the hero of her story. And it was hers to tell, no one else's. As she stared at the canvas in front of her, she knew one thing for sure. She had won.